My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces the moment I spotted that small boy huddled in the corner of the bustling airport terminal, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. His eyes held such raw terror that I couldn't stop myself from moving toward him, drawn by an instinct I didn't fully understand. I approached slowly, crouching down to meet him at eye level, so I wouldn't seem threatening. "Hey there. What's wrong? Are you okay?" I asked, keeping my voice as gentle and calm as possible, hoping to break through the wall of fear surrounding him. The child continued crying, using his tiny hands to wipe away the endless flow of tears that kept coming. His face was red and blotchy, and he looked so utterly lost that it physically hurt to witness. This wasn't just a momentary separation. This boy genuinely believed he'd been abandoned in this massive, overwhelming space where thousands of strangers rushed past without noticing his distress. I carefully placed my hand on his back, settling myself beside him so he could feel a comforting presence. "My name is Kobe. What's your name?" The boy hesitated, his breath hitching as he tried to form words through his sobs. "Benny. My name is Benny," he finally managed to whisper, his voice so soft and broken that I had to lean closer to hear him properly. I offered him a reassuring smile and asked, "Benny, where is your daddy?" He shook his head frantically, his bottom lip trembling. "I don't know, I got lost." Those 3 words pierced straight through me. A child this young, alone in one of the busiest airports in the country, with no idea where his parent had gone or how to find them. The thought made my chest tighten with protective concern. I knew I couldn't just walk away and hope someone else would handle the situation. Every second this boy remained lost was another second of pure fear for him and probably absolute panic for whoever was looking for him. Standing up, I made a quick decision based purely on instinct and compassion. I extended my hand toward Benny, keeping my expression warm and trustworthy. "Come on. Let's find your daddy together, okay? We'll figure this out." For the first time since I'd approached him, Benny's expression shifted slightly toward hope. He tentatively placed his small hand in mine and nodded, sniffling as he tried to compose himself. That tiny gesture of trust from this frightened child made my determination even stronger. As we started walking toward the information desk, my mind raced with concerns I hadn't initially considered. What if his parents saw me with their child and immediately assumed the worst? What if security personnel questioned my motives? What if I was accused of something sinister when all I wanted was to help? These thoughts swirled anxiously in my head, but I pushed them aside. Right now, Benny's safety and reuniting him with his family mattered more than my own comfort or potential embarrassment. I kept Benny's hand firmly but gently in mine as we navigated through the crowd, making sure he stayed close so we wouldn't get separated. His small fingers gripped mine tightly, as if I were his only lifeline in this chaotic environment. "We're going to the big desk over there where nice people can help us find your daddy," I explained, pointing toward the airport information center ahead of us. Benny nodded but didn't speak, his eyes still glassy with unshed tears. We were almost at our destination when something, or rather someone, collided with me from the side. The impact was solid and forceful enough to make me stumble slightly. I looked up to apologize and found myself staring at an imposingly tall figure. The man before me was striking in a way that immediately commanded attention. His sharp, angular jawline could have been carved from stone, and his dark eyes held an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat for reasons I couldn't quite explain. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that screamed wealth and power, every detail from his perfectly knotted tie to his expensive watch suggesting someone who moved in circles far above my own. But what struck me most wasn't his obvious attractiveness or his commanding presence. It was the volatile mixture of fury and desperate worry burning in his eyes. That combination was more terrifying than any anger alone could have been. I felt my stomach drop as I realized this encounter wasn't going to be simple or pleasant. Before I could say anything, the man's gaze dropped to Benny, and his entire body seemed to tense with relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Benny?" The single word came out with such authority that several people nearby turned to look. The volume and commanding tone made the entire area seem to fall silent, as if the world itself had stopped to pay attention. Benny's reaction was immediate and visceral. He released my hand and launched himself toward the man, his small legs carrying him as fast as they could. "Daddy." The joy and relief in that one word were unmistakable. The tall man, Benny's father swept the child up into his arms with practiced ease, holding him against his chest as if he'd never let go again. He pressed his face into Benny's hair, and I saw his shoulders shake with what looked like a suppressed sob of relief. But then, as quickly as that tender moment had appeared, it was over. The man's attention shifted to me, and those intense dark eyes locked onto mine with laser focus. The warmth he'd shown his son evaporated instantly, replaced by cold suspicion and barely contained anger. His jaw clenched as he sized me up, clearly trying to determine whether I was a threat or a savior. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "And what were you doing with my son?" The accusatory tone hit me like a physical blow. After everything, after finding Benny, comforting him, and trying to help, I was being treated like a potential kidnapper. My face flushed hot with a mixture of embarrassment, indignation, and hurt. I understood his protective instinct, truly I did, but being looked at as if I were some kind of predator when I'd done nothing but try to help felt incredibly unfair. I stood there, my hand still hovering in the empty space where Benny's had been moments before, feeling the weight of this stranger's judgment crushing down on me. My mouth opened and closed as I tried to formulate a response that would adequately explain the situation without sounding defensive or suspicious. The airport continued its chaotic movement around us, but in that moment it felt like the three of us existed in a bubble of tension and unspoken accusations. This wasn't how I'd imagined this good deed ending. I'd expected gratitude, relief, maybe even appreciation. Instead, I was being interrogated by a man whose eyes suggested he was seconds away from calling security. All I'd wanted was to help a lost, frightened child find his way home. Now I had to convince this intimidating stranger that my intentions had been pure, not predatory. The irony wasn't lost on me. No good deed goes unpunished, as they say. And standing here under this man's withering glare, I was learning exactly how true that statement could be. Standing frozen in place under the scorching intensity of this CEO-type man's glare, I felt like a defendant in a trial I hadn't known I was entering. His dark eyes bore into me with such ferocity that I genuinely believed he could see straight through to my soul, examining every intention and motivation I'd ever had. The silence stretched between us for what felt like an eternity, heavy with unspoken accusations and defensive denials I hadn't yet voiced. I needed to break through this wall of suspicion before it solidified into something worse. I was only trying to help, I finally managed, though my voice came out shakier than I would have liked. I cleared my throat and tried again with more conviction. Benny was alone and crying. He told me he was lost. I was taking him to the information desk so they could make an announcement to help find you. The words tumbled out quickly, almost desperately, as if speed could somehow prove my sincerity. The man remained motionless, except for his eyes, which continued to scan me from head to toe as if conducting some kind of invisible lie detector test. He adjusted Benny slightly on his hip, his protective grip never loosening for even a second. When he finally spoke again, his tone had shifted from openly hostile to cautiously neutral. "Your name?" It wasn't really a question, more of a command for information he felt entitled to possess. "Kobe," I answered immediately. Then added, "Kobe Tyree," because giving my full name felt more official and trustworthy somehow. I watched as he processed this information, his expression revealing nothing about what he thought or felt. After several long seconds he gave a single curt nod. Sammy Hale." The introduction was delivered with all the warmth of a business card exchange, formal and distant, making it crystal clear that he was only sharing this information out of obligation, not genuine interest in knowing me as a person. That's when Benny, who had been quietly watching our tense exchange, decided to intervene. "Daddy, Kobe helped me. He's really nice," the little boy said, his voice carrying that absolute certainty that only children possess. He looked at me with such open admiration and gratitude that my heart squeezed painfully in my chest. Children had an uncanny ability to see through pretense to the truth underneath. And Benny's endorsement seemed to carry weight with his father. Sammy's expression underwent a subtle transformation. The harsh lines around his mouth softened almost imperceptibly, and his eyes lost some of their sharp edge. He looked down at his son, then back at me, seeming to wage an internal battle between his protective instincts and the evidence before him. Bending down, he pressed a tender kiss to Benny's forehead, a gesture so gentle and loving that it created a stark contrast with the suspicious man who'd been interrogating me moments before. When he straightened and met my gaze again, I saw something different there. Regret. Maybe, or at least the beginnings of understanding. "I apologize," Sammy said, and this time his voice carried genuine emotion beneath the words. I was terrified when I realized Benny wasn't where I'd left him. Just for a minute I turned my back for 1 minute to handle a business call, and when I looked back, he was gone. His jaw clenched as if reliving that moment of panic. Thank you for keeping him safe. Truly. The tension that had been coiling in my shoulders finally began to release. I rolled them back slightly and allowed myself a small, genuine smile. It's really no problem at all. Benny is incredibly brave. You know, not every kid his age would handle being lost as well as he did. It was true, despite his fear and tears, Benny had trusted me and followed along without fighting or running away, which spoke to remarkable maturity for someone so young. Sammy's lips curved upward in response, creating the first real smile I'd seen from him. It was brief and fleeting, like sunshine breaking through storm clouds for just a moment before disappearing again, but it completely transformed his face. The severe, intimidating executive became someone human and accessible, someone who clearly loved his child deeply. That flash of vulnerability did something strange to my heartbeat, making it skip and stutter in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. Reality reasserted itself quickly though, and Sammy's expression returned to its previous seriousness. "What time is your flight?" he asked, glancing at the departure boards visible in the distance. I checked my watch and felt a jolt of alarm. I'd been so focused on helping Benny that I'd completely lost track of time. "Oh no, I've got about 20 minutes before boarding closes," I said, mentally calculating whether I could still make it through security in time. Sammy nodded in understanding. "Then you should go. You've already done more than enough." He paused, then added with slightly more warmth, "Thank you again, Kobe." The use of my first name instead of the formal distance he'd maintained earlier felt significant somehow, like a small bridge being built between us. I gathered my bag and prepared to leave, ready to put this strange encounter behind me and get on with my original plans. But just as I took my first step away, Benny's voice rang out desperately. "Wait, Kobe." I stopped and turned back around. What happened next caught me completely off guard. Benny wriggled out of his father's grip and ran straight to me, wrapping his small arms around my legs in a fierce hug that nearly knocked me off balance. I crouched down immediately and returned the embrace, feeling the solid warmth of this trusting child in my arms. Something about that simple gesture reached deep into a place I didn't even know existed inside me. "You take care of yourself, Benny," I said softly, reaching up to gently ruffle his soft hair. "Listen to your daddy and don't wander off anymore. Okay?" Benny nodded seriously, as if we were making a solemn pact. "I promise," he whispered. Then he released me and walked back to Sammy, who immediately took his hand firmly in his own. As I stood back up, my eyes met Sammy's once more. This time, the look that passed between us was complicated and layered with meanings I couldn't quite decipher. There was gratitude there, certainly, but also something else. Something heavier and more profound. It felt like standing on the edge of something unknown and potentially important, though that thought seemed ridiculous given that we were complete strangers who'd met under stressful circumstances. Neither of us spoke for that suspended moment. The airport's noise seemed muted and distant, like we existed in a pocket of stillness amid the chaos. His dark eyes held mine with an intensity that made my breath catch, and I saw something flicker across his face. Curiosity perhaps, or recognition of the same strange connection I was feeling. But before either of us could acknowledge or explore whatever this was, the spell broke. Sammy gave me one final nod, turned and walked away with Benny's hands securely in his. I watched them disappear into the crowd of travelers, Benny's small figure gradually becoming impossible to distinguish from all the other children in the terminal. And then they were gone completely, swallowed up by the masses of people rushing to their own destinations and reunions. I stood there for several seconds longer than necessary, feeling an odd emptiness settle in my chest, where moments before there had been anxiety and defensive indignation. Something about that encounter had affected me in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Shaking my head at my own strange reaction, I turned and hurried toward my gate, forcing myself to focus on practical matters like making my flight on time rather than dwelling on the lingering ghost of that final look Sammy had given me. 2 full weeks passed before that airport encounter crossed my mind with any real frequency, though I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about Benny and his intense father a few times in quiet moments. Life had a way of pulling you back into routine, and my routine was demanding enough to keep me thoroughly distracted. As a junior architect at Morrison & Associates, one of the more prestigious firms in the city, I spent my days buried in blueprints, design software, and client presentations. The work was challenging and consuming, which I appreciated because it left little mental space for dwelling on strange airport meetings with handsome strangers and their adorable sons. This particular morning started like any other. I arrived at the office with my usual coffee, settled into my desk, and began reviewing the residential project I'd been developing for the past month. I was deep in concentration, mentally walking through spatial flows and natural lighting considerations, when my boss Gerald Mitchell appeared beside my cubicle. "Kobe, I need you in conference room A in 10 minutes, he said without preamble. I looked up from my monitor, slightly surprised. Client meetings usually involved more advance warning. "We've got a major prospective client coming in, and I want all hands on deck for this presentation." I nodded, quickly saving my work and gathering my presentation materials. "Who's the client?" I asked, more out of curiosity than any real need to know before the meeting. Gerald paused in his retreat toward his own office and glanced back. "Hale Enterprises. The CEO himself is coming to evaluate our portfolio for a major commercial development project." My hands froze mid-reach for my leather portfolio case. Hale. Could it possibly be the same Hale? The city had millions of people, surely Hale wasn't that uncommon a surname. I tried to push the thought aside as I made my way to the conference room, telling myself I was being ridiculous for even considering the possibility. But the moment the conference room door opened and Sammy Hale walked through it, every rational argument I'd constructed collapsed. It was him, exactly him, the same sharp jawline, the same intense dark eyes, the same powerful presence that seemed to command immediate attention from everyone in the room. He wore a different suit today, navy instead of charcoal, but the effect was identical: wealth, authority, and complete confidence in his place at the top of any hierarchy. My breath caught in my throat as our eyes met across the polished conference table. His expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: recognition, surprise, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Colby," the way he said my name, with that mixture of disbelief and what almost sounded like pleasure, made several of my colleagues turn to look at me with curious expressions. I forced myself to maintain professional composure despite my racing heart. Standing up properly, I extended my hand across the table. "Mr. Hale, it's good to see you again." The formal address seemed important in this setting, a way to establish boundaries between our previous encounter and this professional situation. The meeting proceeded, but I couldn't shake my awareness of Sammy's presence. Every time I spoke to explain design concepts or present our firm's approach to sustainable architecture, I felt his gaze on me. It wasn't the suspicious scrutiny from the airport. This was different, more contemplative, more interested, more personal than any client should be, looking at a junior member of the architectural team. When I presented the specific design elements I'd been developing, demonstrating our innovative approach to integrating green spaces in urban commercial buildings, his attention never wavered. He asked intelligent, probing questions that showed he wasn't just here for show but genuinely understood the technical aspects of what we were proposing. As the formal presentation concluded and the senior partners began discussing timeline and budget parameters with Sammy, I started gathering my materials, assuming my part in the meeting was finished. But as everyone began to disperse, Sammy caught my eye and gave a slight nod toward the hallway. The message was clear: he wanted to speak privately. My stomach did a nervous flip as I waited for the conference room to empty, then followed him to a quieter corner of the office space, away from the main workflow areas where curious ears might overhear. "I never expected to see you again," Sammy said once we had relative privacy. His demeanor had shifted subtly now that we were away from the formal business setting. The rigid CEO posture had relaxed slightly, and his expression held genuine warmth rather than professional courtesy. He kept his hands in his pockets, a gesture that somehow made him seem more approachable despite his still intimidating presence. Benny talks about you constantly. He calls you the nice man from the airport, and keeps asking when he'll see you again. My heart did that strange stuttering thing again at the mention of Benny. Really? That's sweet, I managed to say, though my voice came out softer than I'd intended. The image of that little boy's tear-stained face and subsequent bright smile played through my memory, bringing an involuntary smile to my own face. There was something deeply touching about knowing I'd made enough of an impression to be remembered by a child I'd spent less than 30 minutes with. Sammy's expression grew even warmer, his eyes crinkling slightly at the corners in a way that suggested he smiled more than his serious demeanor typically let on. If you're not opposed to the idea, I'd like to invite you to dinner this weekend. At my home, he clarified, perhaps sensing my potential hesitation about the appropriateness of such an invitation. Benny would be thrilled to see you again, and honestly I think I owe you more than just a hurried thank you in an airport terminal. The invitation hung in the air between us, weighted with implications I wasn't sure either of us was ready to acknowledge. This wasn't just a simple thank you dinner, or at least it didn't feel like one. The way Sammy was looking at me suggested layers of meaning beneath the surface explanation. Part of me wanted to politely decline, to keep that airport encounter as a contained moment that didn't spill over into the rest of my life. But a larger part of me, the part that had felt that strange connection, that had been unconsciously hoping to see them again, immediately wanted to accept. I'd like that, I heard myself saying before I'd fully processed the decision. I'd really like to see Benny again. That last part was true, though I was deliberately avoiding acknowledging that seeing Sammy again held its own appeal, one that had nothing to do with his adorable son and everything to do with the man himself. Relief and something that looked remarkably like happiness flashed across Sammy's features. He pulled a business card from his inner jacket pocket and handed it to me, his fingers brushing mine briefly in the exchange. Even that minimal contact sent an unexpected jolt through my system. My personal address is on the back. Saturday evening, 7 o'clock? I turned the card over, noting the elegantly embossed information and the handwritten address in what must be Sammy's own distinctive script. I'll be there, I confirmed, tucking the card carefully into my own pocket. As Sammy walked away to rejoin the senior partners for continued discussions, I remained in that quiet corner for a moment longer, trying to process what had just happened. My professional life and that strange airport encounter had just collided in the most unexpected way possible. I was going to have dinner at Sammy Hale's home. I was going to see Benny again. And most confusing of all, I was looking forward to both prospects with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to the actual situation. Returning to my desk, I tried to focus on my work, but my concentration had been thoroughly shattered. My mind kept wandering to Saturday, to what it might be like to see Sammy in his home environment, rather than in professional or crisis settings. What would we talk about? Would it be awkward or natural? And why did the thought of spending an evening with him and Benny fill me with such anticipatory nervousness? I pulled out the business card again, running my thumb over the raised lettering of his name. Sammy Hale, CEO, single father, and apparently someone who'd made enough of an impression on me that 2 weeks later the prospect of seeing him again could derail my entire afternoon's productivity. This was becoming complicated in ways I hadn't anticipated, and I wasn't entirely sure whether that was a good thing or something I should be more cautious about. But either way, Saturday was coming, and I found myself both dreading and desperately anticipating what might unfold when I walked through his door. Saturday evening arrived faster than I'd anticipated, and as I stood outside Sammy's residence, I had to physically stop myself from gaping. The house, no, mansion, before me was something straight out of an architectural magazine. Marble pillars framed the entrance. The lawn was immaculately manicured with geometric precision, and the grand double doors looked like they belonged to a palace rather than a private home. For a brief moment, my confidence wavered. What was I doing here? I was just a junior architect who lived in a modest apartment downtown. This world of wealth and luxury felt completely foreign to me. Before my nerves could convince me to leave, I pressed the doorbell. The melodic chime had barely finished echoing when the door flew open, and suddenly Benny was launching himself at me with the pure, unfiltered joy that only children possess. "Kobe, you actually came." his arms wrapped around my waist in a fierce hug that nearly knocked me backward. All my anxiety melted away instantly, replaced by warmth that spread through my chest. "Hey, Benny. Of course I came. I never break my promises," I said, crouching down to return his embrace properly. Sammy appeared behind his son, and I found myself staring all over again. Gone was the intimidating CEO in his power suit. Instead, he wore a simple black shirt that hugged his frame in ways that made my mouth go dry, paired with well-fitted jeans that somehow made him look even more attractive than his formal attire had. This casual version of Sammy felt more real, more accessible, and infinitely more dangerous to my composure. "Kobe, welcome. Please come inside," he said, and the warmth in his voice was something entirely new. No professional distance, no suspicious edge, just genuine hospitality. Dinner was a lively affair dominated by Benny's enthusiastic chatter. He talked about everything: his toy collection, his kindergarten teacher, Miss Rachel, his best friend Tyler who had a pet hamster, and most touchingly how happy he was that I'd come to visit. I found myself completely charmed by his innocent observations and endless questions. Meanwhile, Sammy remained mostly quiet, but I was acutely aware of his gaze on me throughout the meal. He wasn't just watching, he was studying me as if trying to solve some complex equation that I represented. After we'd finished eating and Benny had been tucked into bed following 3 storybooks and 4 glasses of water, Sammy invited me to his private study. The room was exactly what I'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk with dual monitors, leather furniture that probably cost more than my car. We settled onto the couch and a comfortable silence fell between us. It felt natural, easy, like we'd done this 100 times before rather than this being only our second real conversation. "What you did for Benny at the airport," Sammy began suddenly, breaking the silence. "I'll never forget that. You should know, he's never been that comfortable with a stranger before. Usually he's extremely shy around new people." I shrugged, trying to downplay the significance. Anyone would have done the same thing. "He needed help." But Sammy shook his head with surprising vehemence. "No, it was more than just helping. You made him feel safe when he was terrified. That's rare, especially for a child who's learned to be cautious about who he trusts." There was something in his eyes that made me lean forward slightly. "Sammy, is everything all right?" My voice came out softer than I'd intended, but it felt appropriate for whatever was happening between us in this moment. He took a deep breath, his jaw clenching as if he was preparing to share something painful. "Benny's mother isn't in the picture. She left when he was barely a year old. Said she wasn't ready for motherhood, that she'd made a mistake. She walked away and left me to handle everything alone." The raw pain in his voice made my heart ache. "I've been raising him by myself ever since, trying to be both parents, trying to fill a void that shouldn't exist." Without thinking, I reached out and placed my hand over his where it rested on his knee. "I'm so sorry you both went through that." The touch seemed to ground him, and when he looked at me, I saw vulnerability that he probably rarely showed anyone. "Do you know what the strangest part is?" he asked, his voice dropping lower. "Since meeting you, Benny has been different. Lighter. He keeps asking about you, wondering when he'll see you again. And honestly, I've been wondering the same thing." My heart began pounding harder. "What are you saying?" Sammy shifted closer, closing the space between us on the couch. "I'm saying that your presence has affected both of us in ways I can't fully fathom. When I'm around you, I feel something I haven't felt in years. Like maybe I don't have to carry everything alone. Like maybe there's room in our lives for someone else." His hand came up to cup my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. "Kobe, I know this is fast, probably too fast, but I can't stop thinking about you. Your kindness, your smile, the way you were with Benny, it's all consuming my thoughts." Before I could process what was happening or formulate any kind of response, Sammy leaned in and kissed me. His lips were soft but insistent, the kiss carrying both gentleness and desperate intensity, as if he'd been holding back for weeks rather than days. My entire body froze for a heartbeat before instinct took over and I kissed him back, my hand coming up to grip his shirt. Time seemed to suspend itself. The kiss deepened, his other hand sliding into my hair, and I could feel the controlled strength in how he held me. Firm enough to convey desire but careful enough not to overwhelm. When we finally broke apart, both breathing harder than before, Sammy rested his forehead against mine. I probably should have asked permission first, he murmured, but there was no real regret in his tone. I'm not complaining, I managed to say, my voice embarrassingly breathless. He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes, his expression serious. I need you to understand something. I have a son, and his well-being comes before everything else. If this, whatever this is between us, goes any further, I need to know you're serious. I can't let someone into his life who might disappear. The weight of his words settled over me, and I understood the enormity of what he was really asking. This wasn't just about attraction or dating. It was about potentially becoming part of a family, about being someone a child could depend on. I understand, I said firmly, and I wouldn't be here if I wasn't already invested in both of you. Sammy's expression softened into something that looked remarkably like relief mixed with hope. He kissed me again, slower this time, sweeter, like a promise being sealed between us. As I drove home later that night, my lips still tingling and my mind replaying every moment, I knew with absolute certainty that my life had just fundamentally changed direction. Whatever was beginning with Sammy and Benny felt significant in ways that terrified and excited me in equal measure. The following days transformed into something beautiful and unexpectedly natural. Sammy and I texted constantly. Good morning messages, random thoughts throughout the day, good night wishes that stretched into long conversations. We had dinner together several times, always with Benny present, and I found myself settling into their routine with surprising ease. Benny would show me his latest drawings, demand that I help build elaborate block towers, and insist I read his bedtime stories with different voices for each character. I was falling into the rhythm of being part of their small family unit, and the feeling was intoxicating. But then everything shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk reviewing structural calculations, when my phone buzzed with a message from Sammy. We need to talk. Come to my office. Now, the words were cold, clinical, completely devoid of the warmth that had characterized our recent communications. My stomach dropped. What had happened? Had I done something wrong? The 20-minute drive to Hale Enterprises felt like hours, anxiety building with each passing block. When I arrived at his office, Sammy was standing with his back to the door, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline below. Sammy, what's going on? I asked, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. He didn't turn around immediately, and when he finally did, his expression was completely closed off. The warm, vulnerable man from recent days had vanished, replaced by the cold CEO I'd first encountered at the airport. You never mentioned being involved with someone else, he said flatly. Confusion crashed over me. What? I don't understand what you're talking about. Sammy's jaw clenched, and I saw his hands ball into fists at his sides. I saw you yesterday, at the cafe on Market Street. You were with someone. A man. You were laughing together and your hand was on his arm. It looked extremely intimate. My mind raced backward through yesterday's activities and then understanding dawned. He was talking about Jared, my former colleague who I'd met for coffee to catch up. That was Jared, I explained quickly. He's an old co-worker and friend. We used to work together at my previous firm. We were just reminiscing about old projects and mutual acquaintances. There's nothing romantic there whatsoever. But Sammy wasn't softening. If anything, his expression grew harder. Friends don't look at each other the way you two were looking at each other. I watched you for several minutes, Kobe. You seemed completely comfortable, completely absorbed in him. Frustration began replacing my initial confusion. So you were watching me? Instead of approaching and asking about it, you just assumed the worst. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Do you really think so little of me that you believe I'd be pursuing something with you and Benny while being involved with someone else? That's incredibly insulting. Sammy moved closer, his own voice rising to match mine. Insulting? Do you have any idea what trust means to me? Benny's mother betrayed me in the worst possible way. She lied, she manipulated, and then she abandoned us both. I cannot go through that again, and I absolutely will not expose my son to that kind of pain. The mention of his ex and her betrayal made something click into place. Sammy's reaction wasn't really about what he'd seen at the cafe. It was about his past trauma, about wounds that clearly hadn't healed, but that understanding didn't make his accusations hurt any less. I am not her, I said, forcing my voice to steady even as my emotions churned. I'm the person who helped your son when he was lost and scared. I'm the person who's been showing up for both of you, who's been genuine from the very beginning. If you can't trust me, if you're going to jump to conclusions every time you see something you don't understand, then maybe we need to reconsider what we're doing here. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. Sammy's expression flickered. I saw shock, regret, and something that looked like fear flash across his features. But he didn't say anything, didn't take back his accusations or apologize. The silence stretched unbearably. Finally, I turned toward the door. When you're ready to actually talk about this instead of accusing me, let me know, I said quietly. But I won't stay here and be treated like I'm guilty of something I didn't do. I walked out of his office, down the elevator, through the lobby, and out into the afternoon sunlight, moving on autopilot while my mind tried to process what had just happened. Had we really just imploded over a misunderstanding? Was Sammy so damaged by his past that he couldn't see past it to the present? The thought of losing what we'd been building, not just with Sammy but with Benny too, made my chest physically ache. The next 3 days were torture. No messages, no calls, nothing but silence from Sammy's end. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office and taking on extra assignments to keep my mind occupied. But nothing could completely distract me from the hollow feeling that had taken up residence in my chest. I'd started falling for both of them, the serious, damaged man and his sweet, trusting son, and now it felt like that door had slammed shut before I'd even fully stepped through it. I replayed our argument constantly, analyzing every word, every expression. Part of me was angry that Sammy had jumped to such hurtful conclusions, but another part understood his fear, his desperate need to protect both himself and Benny from potential harm. That didn't excuse his behavior, but it helped me understand the root of it. The question was whether understanding was enough, whether we could move past this, or if the damage was already irreparable. On the third evening, I was mechanically eating takeout while pretending to watch television when someone knocked on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I considered ignoring it. But curiosity won out, and when I opened the door, my breath caught in my throat. Benny stood there with tears streaming down his face, and behind him, Sammy looked absolutely wrecked, exhausted, remorseful, and desperate in equal measure. Whatever happened next, I knew it would determine everything. Seeing Benny's tear-stained face destroyed any residual anger I'd been holding on to. "Kobe, please don't leave us," the little boy sobbed, his small body shaking with the force of his emotions. "Daddy said he made a mistake and he's sorry. Please come back. I miss you so much." Without hesitation, I dropped to my knees and pulled him into a tight embrace, feeling his arms wrap around my neck with desperate strength. "Hey, it's okay. I'm right here, Benny. I'm not going anywhere. I promise," I murmured into his hair, my own eyes stinging with unshed tears. Over Benny's head, I met Sammy's gaze. He looked like he hadn't slept properly in days. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his normally immaculate appearance was disheveled in a way that suggested he'd stopped caring about such things. "Can we come in?" he asked quietly, his voice rough with emotion. I nodded and stepped back, still holding Benny as I moved to let them enter my modest apartment. It was a far cry from Sammy's mansion, but in that moment, the difference in our circumstances seemed irrelevant. Once inside, I set Benny down on the couch and grabbed a tissue to help him wipe his face. Sammy remained standing near the door, as if unsure whether he had the right to come further into my space. "Kobe, I owe you an enormous apology," he began, his hands shoved deep in his pockets in that gesture I'd learned meant he was fighting to maintain composure. "I was wrong, completely, inexcusably wrong. After you left my office, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. So I had Jared checked out. I know that sounds terrible and invasive, but I needed to know the truth." He paused, seeming to gather his courage before continuing. "You were telling me the truth. He's exactly what you said. A friend, a former colleague, nothing more. Your history is clean, your intentions have been genuine. And I let my past poison my ability to see that. I let my fear of being hurt again, of Benny being hurt again, turn me into someone I don't want to be." The raw honesty in his admission hit me hard. He'd actually investigated Jared rather than just trusting my word, which should have made me angry, but I could see the desperation behind that action. A wounded man trying to protect himself and his son the only way he knew how. Trust is a two-way street, I said quietly, glancing at Benny, who was watching us intently. If we're going to make this work, whatever this is, you have to be willing to believe me when I tell you something. I understand you've been hurt badly. I understand you're scared, but I can't build something meaningful with you if you're going to assume the worst every time your insecurity gets triggered. Sammy crossed the room then, stopping directly in front of me, his eyes shining with moisture he was fighting to control. You're absolutely right, and I will work on that. I swear to you I will, he said with fierce conviction. His hand came up to cup my face, his touch gentle despite the intensity of his emotions. What you've done for us, Kobe. You've made me believe that love might be real again. That not everyone leaves. That maybe I don't have to keep all my walls up forever. You've given Benny a sense of family he's never had. I can't lose that. I can't lose you. My own emotions were threatening to overwhelm me. I love you, I said simply, letting the truth of it shine through without embellishment or qualification. I love you and I love Benny. I'm not going anywhere unless you push me away. Sammy's expression crumbled and he pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. I love you too, he whispered against my hair. So much it terrifies me. Benny, not wanting to be left out, scrambled off the couch and wrapped his arms around both our legs, creating a three-person embrace that felt like the most natural thing in the world. We stood there for several long moments, just holding each other, letting the reality of our feelings settle into place. When we finally separated, all three of us were wiping away tears and laughing at ourselves for being so emotional. The following weeks brought transformation. Sammy officially introduced me to his business partners and close friends as his partner, not hiding our relationship but declaring it openly. Benny started calling me Papa Kobe, and every single time he did, my heart felt too large for my chest. We fell into routines together. Weekend breakfast at the diner Benny loved, movie nights where we'd let him pick the film, bedtime stories that had become a sacred ritual. One afternoon at the park, while Benny was playing on the swings and laughing with other children, Sammy reached over and took my hand. You've completed something in me I didn't even know was missing, he said, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. I want you with us permanently. Always. I squeezed his hand and smiled. I'm not going anywhere. You two are my home now, the place where I belong. That evening, after Benny had gone to bed, Sammy led me to his study with an air of nervous anticipation. From his desk drawer, he produced a small velvet box, and my heart began racing. This isn't an engagement ring, he clarified quickly, reading my expression. Not yet anyway, but it is a promise. He opened the box to reveal an elegant silver band with a subtle design etched around it. A promise that I will never doubt you again without cause. A promise that you will always have a place in our family. A promise that I'm in this for the long term. Tears blurred my vision as he slipped the ring onto my finger. I love you so much, I managed to say, my voice breaking with emotion. Sammy kissed me then, deep and passionate and full of promise for our future. Later, when Benny woke from a nightmare and came looking for comfort, he found us both there and we brought him into bed between us. As he fell back asleep with a small smile on his face, one hand holding mine and one holding his father's, I knew this was just the beginning of our story together. A family built not on biology but on choice, trust and love.